Hello everybody and welcome back to the Janus Project. As we talked about in the last episode, today we are doing kind of a joint effort between KXP and POV. And today we are going to race this rocket car across the Arctic surface to see which one can be the better pilot. So first up from the KXP crowd, we got Geofing and Kerman, who needs to adjust his staging here before taking off, but nonetheless, this is a pretty simple rocket car. First stage will send it flying, and the second stage hopefully will never need to be hit, as that is our emergency exit. So with nothing else left to do, no checklist to speak of, it's time to go. So we have the downward facing, or I guess upward facing thrusters to help keep us attached to the surface as we go. Geofing is not exactly thrilled about going as fast as he is, the fastest Kerbal on land so far. And we'll be keeping an eye on our surface speed down there in the bottom left on our nav ball. However, I'll keep record of it, and at the end of the run we will display who got what. Start to wobble a little bit going at high speeds. I gotta make sure that I don't tip too far one way or the other. Very important. We came up here to the North Pole because the Arctic shelf has relatively the flattest lands. However, good not to get too comfortable because there are some bumps in the road, and on several of the test flights that I did ended in disaster. So, and you never know when that little bump in the land is going to come, so it's always wise to stay on your toes. This here we're getting a little bit of a speed wobble. I'm fighting it, but the prograde really wants to shift around, and we should try to keep ourselves relatively on the prograde. Nonetheless, we gain control, and with that, our fuel has depleted, so we are just going to be bringing ourselves to a stop. I decided we didn't need to. We totally could have come to a stop on our own, but I decided to test the emergency abort system, and should have gone a little bit higher if I wanted that parachute to land correctly. Thankfully, however, Geofing Kerman is alive and well, and will be recording a land speed record of 253.7 meters per second. So now let's pass that over to the KSP POV crowd, where Valentina Kerman sits in the cockpit. Once again, ready to take off, this time staying on the ground. However, there's a little bit of a snowstorm when she decides to take off. She could have waited for a little bit longer in the daytime, maybe had a little bit more sun, but nonetheless decides to go. Regardless, we do have this little bug where the word squad follows our mouse no matter where it goes. Don't know what that's all about, but I'm gonna just say that the squad team was here with us in spirit, ready to make history. So without anything else left to do, all the checklists completed, we're gonna go ahead and take off the brakes. We're gonna push ourselves forward a little bit, just get the engines going. Then when Valentina is ready, she will flip the stage button and fire the ignition. 3, 2, 1. Fire. There we go. We have cameras on our downwards facing thrusters, or upwards facing thrusters, however you want to look at it, just to keep an eye on it, make sure that we indeed have them activated. Because without them, I found that this likes to become a plane. It gets enough speed to start taking off. We're already starting to sway from our prograde, which is not a good sign. The KXP crowd had a lot longer of a straight line before it started losing control. Nonetheless, we kind of straighten ourselves out and start building up speed yet again. And our speed gauge we're looking at here in our top screen in the little green lines. We also have one at the top of our nav ball. But once again, I will put our achieved speed at the end. We're hovering our fingers over the staging button because that is our abort sequence, and at the sign of trouble, once we start losing control, then we can activate it because we don't want to lose Valentina. She's been through enough. With that, our fuel runs out, and we can go ahead and start cruising our way back to solid speed. But that's when Valentina herself wants to test out the emergency abort system. So the Separatrons lift her up and out of the way of danger, and the parachute deploys. However, it does take a little bit for it to pop open. Spins the cockpit around, having some pretty good control with the reaction wheel. She goes and looks for her craft. The rest of the rocket car, which has come to a complete stop, safe and sound. We'll be able to recover all that funds. But now we gotta make sure that she lands safe and sound, and we can recover her as well. And with that, we have a much safer touchdown than Geofing did. And unfortunately, we did not beat his score, so we only came in at 246 meters per second. However, Valentina had a little bit to say about that, and she brought up with the board that the atmosphere was different on her launch as opposed to Geofing's, and therefore it wasn't an equal environment that could be tested. And the only way to truly test their skill is to get rid of the atmosphere entirely. So they plan for a rematch. So without the atmosphere involved, on the glassy surface of Mintz, the nice straight shot, this will give a clear answer to who is the better pilot and which ideology serves to win this challenge. So unfortunately, Geofing fell sick during the application process and was not able to get on this mission, so instead we have Bartson. Bartson is a capable pilot, but so far untested. So this will be as important to him as it is to the agency. The upwards facing thrusters are crucial on this run because due to Mintz's low gravity, it takes very little for you to lift off the surface. Bartson seems to know that as he panics, going much faster than Geofing ever did. Start to tilt a little bit, start to slide on the glassy surface. The traction has been turned down, so therefore we must be very careful. It could very easily lose control. Like I mentioned, those thrusters were very important to keep us attached to the surface. However, you can only do so much on Mintz, and once you start getting orbital speed, it's only a matter of time before you leave. So with that, the ground speed has been clocked in and logged, and so now Bartson Kerman has to achieve the second part of the challenge, which is to bring his craft down safely to a stop, so that way we can recover him, because after all, this is a challenge for ground speed, not orbital speed, and if his attempt at a ground speed requires a rescue mission, then I believe that he will have forfeited that challenge. And as we see here, our trajectory was well outside Mintz's sphere of influence, and judging by our trajectories mod, the line's freaking out. It was outside of Kerban's sphere of influence as well. It freezes up here, and I start to wonder if I had maybe done a bad thing by having trajectories on. It was processing all those lines all at once, but thankfully it calmed down. We came close enough to Mintz that we are now back on an impact trajectory, so we won't be lost out to space, but we have to make sure that we land ourselves safely enough. There is fuel in the ejection pod, so if we run out of fuel in the rocket car, we do have some backup. However, if we run out of fuel in the rocket car, then we will probably be going quite fast, and the ejection pod will probably be unsafe. So, Bartson, I'm glad that you are smiling. I'm glad you're happier to be in space than on the ground, but let's get you safely back down. So we don't want to land on the hill, which is unfortunately I think where we're heading. So we're gonna kick on our thrusters, but point more radial out to kind of push out our trajectory. But as you see here, it doesn't take very much to start heading back upwards. Mintz's gravity really is easy to play around with. You can go so much, you can do so much with so little, you can go so far with such little effort. Just taking a look at our trajectories mod to make sure that we are indeed going to land on the glassy lake bed, somewhere nice and flat, and that we also didn't once again send our trajectory going out of the sphere of influence. Barton is so happy, getting ready to make his burn. We're not going to use MechJeb's landing guidance system. We're just going to go ahead and eyeball it based on how much surface speed we have and our thrust to weight ratio. We'll just keep an eye on that to bring ourselves down safely. We can see our shadow, which is a great indicator of how close we are to the surface. So we're just going to kind of feather in the throttle as we come down. Go ahead and switch back out of cinematic mode so we can see our nav ball. And see that we were coming down with a little bit of horizontal speed there, so we balance it out. So now we're just falling vertically, nice and slowly. 11 meters per second, 12 meters per second, not too hard to bleed off. In fact, it's hard not to send our craft rocketing back upwards, so we have to just ease on the throttle ever so gently, then allow ourselves to fall the final 10 meters and come to a complete stop. Engine bells unbroken, all four wheels touchdown, Barton Kerman alive, and he is clocking in top speed of 609.4 meters per second on the surface. That was calculated the moment the front wheels left the surface. That was when the time was stopped. So Valentina has a challenge ahead. On relatively the same starting location, she finds herself once again in the same craft. All things considered, should be the exact same run, but inside the cockpit. So now she has a checklist to go through, make sure her SAS is on, turns on her cameras so she can keep an eye on the upwards thrusters, nav ball to make sure that she is pointed straight and not going up in space. An altitude warning, because once we gain enough speed and we leave the surface, we're going to want to know, and she too has to adjust herself, but with nothing else left to do, ignition. Sense of speed is immediately more apparent in IVA mode when you see the ground rushing below you, and you hear that those engines roar from the inside. It's quite the experience. So we are going to be keeping an eye on our top speed like before right here on the screen. However, it's not long before her top speed is entered into the log because her front wheels indeed left the surface of Mintz, and there's nothing else to be done except she has to make sure that she too can make it home safely. First obstacle with that is making sure she can make it over this hill here, because smacking into it would be quite the disaster. She's going way too fast. There's no real even chance of her landing all four wheels on the surface and start driving again. So it's too dangerous an option. She's not going to do it. And instead, she's going to have to make her way back down to the surface. Takes a little bit to find her trajectory, but she too is on an escape trajectory out of Mintz' sphere of influence, so it is also important for her to land as well. We've got over 500 meters per second of surface speed to kill off before we can zero out ourselves and come into a landing. But we decided not to head for a completely vertical descent. Instead, we're going to land on the glassy surface back there, the frozen lake bed of Mintz. It's slightly in the dark, but light enough that we should be able to see our landing zone. We've got over 1,000 meters per second of delta V in the tank left, which should be enough for landing. However, worst case scenario, like I mentioned before, we do have a little bit of fuel in the escape stage. It's beautiful to see with our own eyes. So 2,500 meters above the surface, and we are pointed retrograde. We're going to use a little bit of our fuel to kill some of our velocity. However, I'm also hesitant about the amount of control I'm going to have with this huge body. The rocket car is not the most maneuverable, and KXP had a nice easy landing, but it is nice and easy when you can see a full 360 degree view around yourself. So we're going to take things a little more cautiously, and we're actually going to utilize our escape pod, pull ourselves away from the rocket car body. We see it going, and we'll say goodbye to that. Unfortunately, that will be destroyed on the surface. No way of recovering that. But we're on Mintz, so there's really no way of recovering it anyways. But with a smaller frame, a little bit more control with the reaction wheel, and our own amount of fuel that we can land with. It's a smaller engine, but it's also a smaller tonnage that we need to stop. So I feel a little more confident landing this thing than that whole rocket car, and I think Valentina would agree. So we're going to go and point ourselves retrograde, and we're testing our thrust to weight ratio, and we see that we can indeed slow this thing down fairly quickly. What I would like to get is a camera. So we look at my available options, but on that screen, only the forward-facing camera is available. But because we use the DE plus, or the MAS plus DE, I should say, it's the other way around. But the DE aspect of our IVA gives us access to the rear view of that camera from the Hull's cams. I don't know why the rear view isn't in all of the IVA screens, but for some reason it's only in the DE version, so we'll just deal with what we got. 363 meters per second isn't a lot of delta V, but once again, thankfully we're on Mintz, where a little goes a long way. Pointed retrograde, and coming down still fairly fast, and that's when I realized that we were actually pointed in the surface mode. We were pointed in orbital mode, not surface mode, and that would have been disastrous if we had left it going for any longer than we did. But even though it's a small engine, as you see here, it doesn't take much to completely reverse our direction, and now we are headed away from the surface yet again. So I flip around to hit our retrograde. Once again, we're just going back and forth now. We have such a high thrust to weight ratio with this thing that that is basically a spaceship in and of itself. We could potentially head back home with this if only we had a heat shield. But nonetheless, I play around with the positioning of the throttle until our trajectory is basically vertical, and that will give me an easier time landing, because once again, we're not using MacJeb's landing guidance for this one either. So And they come very close to disaster as we hit our landing burn at the last second. But with that, we have successfully touched down on Mintz. We haven't come to a stop. We are sliding a little bit, but thankfully Valentina gains control of that. And it is time for her to radio mission control and schedule a pickup. But unfortunately, she left the surface very quickly, so her top speed is only 427.4 meters per second. So the win goes to the KXP crowd. Congratulations. But anyways, that's where I'm going to leave today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward for more Kerbal. If you did, think about subscribing. Drop me a like, let me know your thoughts, and I will see you all in the next one. Take care.